Where did it all begin? Why are we here? Who are we? Where do we come from? What does it all mean?
Okay, let's get back to the author of the history of Halifax. Now, the problem with this written history of Halifax, it got published in 1976. And that's the official word from the Library of Congress. The other issue here is that the author of such history had only been alive in the 1800s. One thing he does make sure we know is that Halifax as a township relinquished seniority to but a few in the whole of the county, as well as America for that matter, and further claims that this is not old country by worldly standards, but our history is young, but then admits that there is an obfuscation in the form of a dropped generation that creates a valley where we only see the darkness of past events. In other words, he has no way of accessing any information from the 1700s or earlier. We have an issue. This isn't a history of this place. It's a story or a legend. I can tell you, though, that the train and the stone buildings were here before the 1800s. But of course, the resident historian here, right, has nothing built before he grew up, which is the 1800s. The earliest he has something built is a cotton mill in 1800 and the railway in 1847. Maybe I'll put this in here, but there is a map of the 1800s, but it looks like somebody changed the date on it, so it could have been earlier. And, I don't know where this map was found or what, but somebody, maybe I'll throw a picture in there of it. There's a date behind whatever forgery there is. I don't know if it's a forgery, I don't know if I'll even put this in the video, because there's so much. There's just so much. A couple of interesting things that he wrote was that Halifax never had a significant or cataclysmic fire in its history. But I learned through other sources that 2 original churches, 2 original meeting houses, the original town hall, the first house built in Halifax, and a few large warehouses, a cotton mill, and the whole of Halifax manufacturing interests burnt to the ground. And of course, the original library in 1848. That sounds like a large fire to me, or a large demolition. We are told when the churches and the meeting houses were built in the mid-1700s, but by whom seems to evade the historian. The warehouses just get a vague, oh, they burnt to a cinder. Curiously, he's writing a history of this area, right? But the tradesmen go unmentioned. The only thing he mentions about the population is the preachers and the aristocrats decree that something should be done or built, and nothing more about those plans are in this historical record. And something else, schoolhouse after schoolhouse after schoolhouse, and I actually lost count at how many of them caught fire. Right, so I just want to mention that. A couple more interesting things is one of the first residents here, John Thompson, he built a brick fortress of a home, complete with slits for firing guns that are 8 foot long with a 12-inch barrel circumference and weighing over 22 pounds in 1677. Now, this house was taken down, destroyed. I don't know. It's very vague where this house went, but it was gone by 1838. And you want to hear another crazy tidbit about Massachusetts? In 1878, they had passed a law that drawing be taught in all schools, and the government recommended that drawing maps would be the dominant classroom material. I'll take that for what you will. I find it very strange, as we see a lot of strange map drawings, don't we? Now I'm wondering how much of this is erosion and how much of it is old vandalism, because these braces look rusted all the way through. Being here gives me the vibe of this vandalism being a 1950s and late 60s thing to do. You know, kids were starting to rebel against the system. And of course, they didn't know where to focus their angst, right? I'm sure they did damage and demoralized things that couldn't fight back, like most cowards. Some of this damage could be recent, but it doesn't feel like that. And you know, of course, people in our modern day are doing similar things, and they think that they have a legitimate reason for it, right? Desecrating old statues, graves, buildings, you know, stuff like that, because because of the evil whitewigs who stole land, freedom, culture, and hijacked what America was supposed to be. And, you know, in my opinion, never was. I've given my opinion on this before. I doubt that the Constitution has anything to do with our society or our civilization any more than who is really on Mount Rushmore. You know, it's just more founded stuff. And look, the way I see it, no one is sick of the oppressive way of life here in America. It's just that they're sick of not being the ones doing it to others. But that's another rant. Now, a lot of these modern day groups believe that the Whigs create a system of modern day slavery, that not even the hardiest of woodsmen can escape, because they'll come find you. Whether or not these people have their priorities straight about what they're doing, they do have a good idea of what's been perpetrated on our society, a lot like what our community has figured out, right? But again, they're taking their angst out on inanimate objects that can't change anything. Or that's certainly not going to change anything, so it's senseless and cowardly, just like in the past. So they end up being every bit as bad as the inheritors who tore down all the old world infrastructure, right? And got rid of statues and buildings. It's the same thing. They don't realize the irony of playing their part in their own reset. And honestly, I think this is one of the tried and true methods of the programmers to activate in our society, to get rid of the old stuff. Further in the idea that some people may have had a reason to desecrate this place is because some of the vandalism could be really, really old, and that this was a graveyard all along back to the 1700s, and folks of this town may have considered some of the people buried here evil, desecrating these graves because, you know, they were the creatures that we see in those old paintings, like the Azabawith entities who dress all crazy with weird fingers and long necks, who never show their feet. Or just old gunslingers that a small, quiet town had enough of. I don't know, what do you guys think? I'm interested to see in the comments what y'all are feeling about this place. So anyway, I found this partially legible document, allegedly from the 1700s, Massachusetts. I'm not going to bore you by reading it to you, because neither one of us will be able to tolerate my incompetence of reading out loud. In summary, it goes like this. Allegedly, right? This small group of entities who ran this county were ruthless people, led not by religious virtue, but impatient vengeance of any who would not obey their church. If you come to reside here, whatever the crisis, incident, or state, your will is no longer your account. The church's will is your propriety. That basically means them, right? They're taking control of you. See, for me, this religious thing seems made up so they can torture and abuse people. Check it out, right? You will pay church dues. With said payments, you revoke any right to resist enforcement from their church rules. They will decide whether you live or die. They will decide if you can reside here after indoctrination and ritual. They will also decide the tax on the money from the job they decide for you, and nothing less than full payment will be tolerated. These entities already have a system of coppers called tithing men, who I've talked about in another video, who walk the beat looking for indiscretions, and if there is anything to report on an individual, it will be revealed in church for all to hear, and you will be duly punished for your derelict. You know, I always knew the coppers of crucifixion without any need for evidence was the oldest profession in America. not prostitution. Nobody was selling sex while these creatures were present. Protection and enforcement was brought here, right alongside the immoral entities. Also, it wouldn't surprise you that these entities brought with them the first indoctrination camps, called school. Yes, Halifax is proud that they're the first colony to bring school to the orphan train culture, or what I like to call the marble people. So, now we know what kind of varmints conjured up brainwashing children. Allegedly, right? It seems like the ghost of this kind of madness and inhumanity may be why the stench of wicked, creepy vibes linger in the remote corners of Massachusetts, like where I live. Now, can you imagine, if this is even true of the 1700s, what these creatures would want to do to the natives? Or, say, a leftover inhabitants from an annihilation? Or reset, or simply a cataclysm? I don't want the 1700s to be so ugly. But whoever came here after a disaster, a war, a mud flood, a plasma melt, whatever happened, set the tone for the rest of the millennia, and none of us can deny the nonsense we call life, right? Things have always seemed to change for the worse for the marble people.
And furthermore, it's no coincidence that the expression wicked was made up by the New Englanders. But you see, when I was a kid, there was no adjective or postnominal needed. If you saw a cool car go by, you just look at your brother or your friend or your parent and say, "Wicked!" That's all that needed to be said.
Where did it all begin? Why are we here? Who are we? Where do we come from? What does it all mean?